Welcome back to the channel, and my gecko greets you. But anyways, this is the third and hopefully final upgrade of her enclosure. In this one, I made some changes and improvements to her setup, and I think it turned out pretty well. Stay tuned to the end of the video to see how she likes her newly revamped enclosure. If you haven't seen the first two upgrade videos, go check those out. But anyways, this is the 3.0 Gecko Vivarium upgrade, so I hope you guys enjoy. It is nighttime in the animal room, and as you can see, she just woke up from her slumber, so we will wait patiently until she climbs out of her coconut and says hello. Here is the current condition of the enclosure, and as you can see, it's looking a little rough, but we can change that. Before I start, I need to give her a temporary setup, so I'm using a 10-gallon tank with a piece of mopani wood, some fake leaves, and a coconut fiber substrate with some leaf litter. Whenever she comes out of her coconut, I can put the coconut in her little setup over here, so I can get started on the project. Now she is coming out of her coconut, and I can try and grab her to put her in the temporary setup. She is definitely a beautiful gecko and goofy as well, because she kept trying to run up my shirt and climb on me like a tree, and she's actually pretty quick too. Alright, that's enough of that. Now she is in her temporary setup with her coconut bridge, so she has a hiding spot. But anyways, now we can get started with the project. So this is what it looks like right now, and it definitely needs another upgrade. The first thing I did was clean up the enclosure a little bit. I removed some dead plants and some of her shed as well. Next, I wiped off the glass because the enclosure was pretty dirty and it definitely needed a nice clean. Next, I took out these 3 manzanita branches just so I could have a fresh start and maybe try something new. I also took out this peperomia because I thought it was in an awkward spot and it gave me a little more room to work. This time around, I am going to try worm castings because it is rich in nutrients and hopefully it will benefit my plants, because I think that's what's been lacking in my bioactive setups. So I'm just going to pour the whole bag and spread it around the bottom of the enclosure. There we go, we have a nice layer. And I sloped it a little bit towards the back to give the enclosure a sense of depth. For this upgrade, I wanted to anchor some branches onto the background just so she could have some more climbing spaces. So I tested out a couple of different branches. I had some grapevine branches as well as some cork bark pieces here. And this took a while. I wasn't really sure what I should do, but I ended up just using the same manzanita branches from before. I felt that the manzanita branches had better movement and direction and just fit the setup more. I arranged the manzanita branches into different formations until I found something that I liked. Now that the hard part is over, trying to find out what I like and what flows nicely, I had to prop these branches up so they wouldn't fall. So then we can move on to the next step, which is trying to anchor them into the background. To do this, I'm going to try the Great Stuff Pond and Stone expanding foam again. That's how I made the background, and I'm hoping this works for the branches as well. So this foam is pretty cool. All you have to do is just spray it onto whatever you want, and then in a few minutes it turns straight into foam, and it's pretty durable and waterproof as well, which is what we want. I sprayed around each branch and tried to get it anchored into the background as much as possible, and I used a lot of foam, but it's okay because I want it to be durable and we can clean it up later. I wanted the foam to hold the weight of the manzanita branches so they don't fall, so that's why I used so much foam. So this is what I ended up with, and now we just have to wait a few minutes for the foam to fully cure. So after a while you can see the foam has expanded and isn't a liquid anymore. Now is the moment of truth to see if it will hold the branches, and this was super nerve-wracking to be honest. To my surprise, the foam actually did a great job of holding up the branches, as you can see with my excitement here. They were pretty sturdy, but they did have a little bit of wiggle, which was kind of concerning, but it turned out okay. Next, I could rip off the foam and just clean it up a little bit, make it look nicer, and it was actually pretty hard to rip it off, but as you can see, it's literally just foam. So I ended up using a kitchen knife to cut off the excess foam and just make it a little bit nicer. I cut the excess foam of each branch, and I tried not to cut any vital spots so that they stayed connected to the background. Next, I tried to add some super glue to the foam and then some sphagnum moss to make it look nicer and so that you couldn't see the foam, but this didn't end up so well, and I'm kind of just testing some different techniques out, so yeah, that didn't work too well. Alright, it's the next day and I am snowed in completely, so I guess this is a good day to keep working on the project. Unfortunately, this branch seemed to have been sagging, so I had to support it. But anyways, enough about my failures. Let's get to preparing the plants for the new setup. Before I plant the enclosure, I want to take each plant and gently take it out of its pot and try and remove all of the soil from its roots. This way we are trying not to get any fertilizer into the setup, as well as just make it easier for planting the enclosure. So next I'm going to gently rinse off the roots of the plants and just try and get as much of that dirt off as possible, just so I have completely bare roots. Now we pretty much have bare roots here, and this plant actually turned out to be 2 plants. So I repeated this process for the rest of the plants. I took them out of their pots, gently removed the soil, and rinsed off their roots. Alright, now that we have all of our plants prepared, we can start planting the enclosure. First up, I'm going to plant this beautiful limelight dracaena, and I ended up placing it in the back right corner. Next, I took my scissors and trimmed off an extension of the umbrella plant because it was taking up too much space. Now we have more room to plant this beautiful rosy maidenhair fern. This is a great plant for my gecko to hide in, and I placed it in the back center. Next up, I have these vibrant photonia, which I think will be a great addition to the foreground. Next up, I have the biggest plant so far, is this really cool Swiss cheese plant. I just found this plant super cool and super unique, so I had to find it and put it in this setup. I placed it in the back left corner. Next up is another plant that I thought was really cool, is this heartleaf philodendron. I'm hoping this plant does good in here because I want to see the leaves grow really big and the gecko climbing on them. Next up, I have this little peperomia that I picked out, and I planted it in the center of the enclosure. This is a pretty durable plant, so I'm hoping it does good in here and can grow nicely. After that, I planted this ivy, which was similar to the one I used before that was still doing pretty well in the setup. But anyways, I cut it up and just planted it throughout the very front of the enclosure. Now I can spray down the enclosure so the plants don't dry out, and we can add the cleanup crew. I will be using powder orange isopods, which will be good for breaking down organic matter, as well as cleaning up after the gecko. I gently dump them into the back of the setup so they can get to work. I am also going to add some springtails to the cleanup crew, and they will be good for eating mold and decaying matter. And finally, I wanted to add a shingle vine. This was in here before, but it didn't do so well, so I ended up taking it out and grew it separately, but now I think it's time to add it back into the setup. So I put it back here, and as you can see, I want it to be climbing up all of the background. Alright, I'll give the enclosure one more spray down so nothing dries out, and we can add some leaf litter. Finally, I added this thin piece of glass to the top of the enclosure to hold in more humidity because the setup seemed to be drying out pretty quickly. I also think this might have to do with how thick the drainage layer is, but anyways, I added the thermometer and hydrometer back into the setup so we know the temperature and humidity of the enclosure. Besides the coconut and the feeding ledge, the enclosure is done. Alright, I let the enclosure establish for a week, and now I can add my gecko to her third rendition of her Bioactive Vivarium. So I added back her feeding ledge to the enclosure, as well as her beloved coconut bridge. And finally, we have the 3.0 Crested Gecko Vivarium complete. Now I can get her out of this crappy temporary setup and gently pick her up and introduce her to her newly revamped Bioactive Vivarium. Let's see what she thinks. As you can see, she is flicking her tongue, which means she is smelling her new environment. She might be a bit uncomfortable because the lights are on and she just woke up. So let's turn off the lights and turn on night vision. So now we can just let her be and just see what she does, see what she explores. And as you can see, she is flicking her tongue a lot, which means she is smelling her environment. Pretty interesting. I even caught her making little squeaking sounds. Listen carefully. Alright, I mixed up some tasty food for her, and I'll place it in her feeding ledge, and I can close up the doors and just let her explore without me bothering her. So funny enough, she ended up going back into her coconut and sniffing it out, which I just found super interesting. I guess she just wanted to double check that that was her coconut, but pretty interesting behavior from her. But yeah, it's really cute. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be sure to update you soon.